Welcome, and thank you for joining me on the Spiritual Ninja podcast, where we have heart to heart conversations with people who live with spiritual depth and elite performance. Hi, David. Welcome to the Spiritual Ninja podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here today. I'm looking forward to this time together.
Well, thank you so much. I too am looking forward to our time together here.
Thank you. You and I met many, many years ago, and we haven't had the chance to spend any time together or really speak much, but I've heard a lot about your work, and I really love having the opportunity to speak with people who have spent so much time in their life really nurturing their spiritual connection and then taking that out into the world. So the premise of this podcast is twofold. One is that there's this magical spark of life that we all come from, and I'm calling that just one spirit, just to make it simple. But the idea is that even if it's the same religion, the same spiritual practice, whatever it may be, each person's on their unique path. And so I think people really enjoy hearing people's journeys and how it all unfolded for them. And the other part of the podcast that I think is super important is that spirituality is very practical. It allows us to show up in the world, whether it's with our family or work, whatever it is, and to do the best work that we can do because we're coming from a clearer place. And together, I'm calling this the spiritual ninja because I feel like it takes ninja skills to go inside ourselves and figure out how to live from our spirit. And then on the outside, how to navigate this, wild world that a lot of times seems the opposite of love and awareness. So if you would be so kind, if you think back to your beginning of your spiritual journey, and if you can share a little bit of a spiritual internal biography of your path, of how it started, all the different things you've gone through, different religions, spirituality practices, and to where you are today.
Well, to do the whole thing would take hours and hours, if not days. But I can pick a starting point. When I was about 20 years old, 21, I guess, I was in law school. I actually finished law school and never became a lawyer because I knew right away it was definitely not my path, but I had done half of it and I decided to finish it. And it's helped me. But I was a young man and I was very much into psychedelics. And it was a little different then in that there was kind of a psychedelic culture. I was in New York City and there was a psychedelic community. And I had one of my best friends who I've grown up with since we were 4, and we had tripped a lot together, and we began to feel kind of a connection with more than just the traditional religious upbringing. I was raised as a Jew, but I always knew there was more than Orthodox point of view, let's say that. I mean, standard point of view. I don't mean Orthodox Judaism. So we decided, my dear friend and I, let's just take all the psychedelics we have at once and see what happens.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. So we took, I mean, I won't go through the whole list, but we said, every time we've taken an hallucinogen, there's a point where you don't go further because the subconscious knows you took something external. We didn't know this at the time, but we had a feeling, an intuition. We need to get beyond this. So we did. We were up at a quiet house in Connecticut on a lake, and we took just everything. And after the first hour, we realized that we were connected telepathically and we didn't really need to speak. And it was a big house, and we each went to one end of the house, wrote down what we thought the other was thinking and feeling, and totally accurate. From that point, we didn't have a lot of verbal communication, except when some important things happened, which they did in that evening. We stayed in that state for 8 hours, and we encountered non-physical reality as well as physical reality. That's a safe way to put it. And there were some struggles that we had to go through, and we went through all of this in silence, but absolutely connected. So at the end of this real struggle that we went through for 8 hours, I suddenly had this profound realization, which, if I were to put it into words, would be that there is a God, there is one being only, and that being is essentially good, not dualistic, good and bad. As soon as that happened, I had the realization I stopped connecting with my friend and everything became very peaceful. And he was still in the midst of the struggle for maybe another 45 minutes. and he kept kind of tuning into me, and I wasn't there. And it was very perplexing for him. And then suddenly he had the same realization. And then the two of us were really peaceful. And we went out. The sun was just coming up. It was like the movies. We went out and the clouds parted and a sunbeam came down on us. It was quite dramatic. And then we went back into the house and took whatever we had left of the psychedelics and hashish and other things that we took, and we flushed them down the toilet. And I never had to do that again in my life, with one exception, but normally never again. I knew that was as far as you could go with a substance. So we started to look without a substance, and I had a very deep inner experience, which subsequently, which I didn't understand. It's a lot of energy and a lot of light. And suddenly I heard this word Sufi. Inwardly, I had no idea what it was. So, of course, this was, in the late 60s, there was no internet to go to. So I looked in the dictionary. It said Sufi, a Muslim mystic. And I thought, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a mystic. What's this all about? I'm going to skip around a little bit here, but I could not find what I was looking for as far as Sufis. I kept asking people. They said, no, I don't know what that is. It's a Muslim thing and so on. Subsequently, I decided I'm going to go to a psychic and see what they say. So I went to a very famous psychic in New York City. She's not alive. Her name was Rose Erickson. And she would meet once a week, and there would be about 30, maybe 35 people there. And you could write 3 questions. I only wrote 1. And you fold it up and you put your initials on the outside. You put it in and she picks them out randomly. And I went into the room and it actually felt very real. I was leery, I was in law school, so you question everything. But this felt real. And she would pick up a paper. It was folded, and it's kind of like if you've ever seen old Johnny Carson, Karnak, she'd hold it up and then she'd read the initials and she'd give a reading. This is what psychics do. And she was good. And after she read your question or gave you your reading, you were supposed to get up and leave. So it was going along rather smoothly. And after maybe 6 or 8, 10 people, she picked up mine and she didn't look at the initials yet. And she said, I don't know who this person is, but they should come up here. She was sitting on a platform. They can do this job better than I do.
Wow.
And she read my initials. Well, I was too shy. I'm
Yeah.
not going to admit it in front of 20 people, 30 or whatever was left. And everybody's looking around. Who is this? And she's saying, come on up here. And I'm looking around just like everybody else and kind of faking it. I was definitely too shy and too afraid to go up there. And she kind of grumbled and said, okay. And then she said a few things about my future life. Remember, this was 61 years ago. And what she said has come true. It's not important. It was personal. But then she, this strange reading of this word Sophie, but it's not someone's name. But I keep hearing it for you. Sophie, Sophie, Sophie. I knew it was Sufi. And she said, I have a message for you from these Sophies on the other side. And the message is Red Indian Chief. I thought, what? This is, and it really tested my faith because what does that mean, Red Indian Chief? So the next day or a couple of days later, I went into the New York City Library, and there was a book that I took out on Sufism, not about it, but about someone's personal experience. And the next day, I was back in school, and I was in a class called Admiralty Law, which is about the law of the sea. It was so incredibly boring that I was just sitting there, and I thought, I'll take a look at that book. And this is when my mind really got blown. I opened the book randomly in the middle of the book, and there's a sentence that jumps out at me. It's like literally above the page. And it says, if you're interested in Red Indian Chiefs, go see a spiritualist. If you want to
Wow.
know the truth, look within your own heart.
Wow.
And I said, okay. I
Wow.
closed the book. I left in the middle of class. I got up and walked out. The professor said, "Where are you going?" I just walked out and I began to walk around New York City and just walked and thought, what have I gotten into? What
Mm.
is all this? How could that have happened? And many, many more questions. Well, the friend of mine who was on the trip with me that night, he's an Aries. He's a real go-getter. And he said, "Do you know anything about Sufis?" I said, "The only thing I know is that Thursday night is when they meet. This is traditional Sufism." And the next week, he called me back and he said, "I looked on the back of the Village Voice. There used to be a calendar there. And he said, there's a meditation meeting on Thursday nights." So Thursday night, the two of us go to this place above a bakery on 72nd Street in New York City. We walk up the stairs, and first there's a really elderly lady sitting at a card table, and she says, $2. We each paid our $2. We didn't know what we were getting into, and we go into this room, and the walls are lined with huge Tibetan gongs, really
Mm.
6 foot, some of them were 6 feet. And we said, what's going to happen? And the room gets six more little old ladies. The oldest one was in the middle of her 90s, and the youngest was probably 80. And then there we were, the two kids, as they called us. And I don't think anybody else ever visited this meditation. And then the teacher came in, and he was a man, again, in his 70s, very, very clear man, white hair, and he was wearing a suit. He kind of looked like a Southern Baptist preacher, but he
Mm.
wasn't. He was actually a light engineer, and he had retired from General Electric, where he worked light engineering, I guess. And he began to talk, and he spoke about traditions and religions, things I had never heard of. And both of us, my friend and I, were really kind of gobsmacked. Something was really powerfully going on. At the very end of his talk, he said to this woman who was probably 5 feet tall and 80 pounds, her name was Nesta Karen Crane. He said, "Nesta, would you like to play the gongs?" And this little old lady stands up and she said, "Tonight I'm going to play Thunderstorm in the Himalayas." And she goes to this 6 foot gong and she starts blasting it. The sound is overwhelming. And that's how it ends. And we go up to him after the class and say, "Do you know Sufis?" He said, "Yes." "How can we meet some?" He said, "Well, go home and do this exercise." And he gave us an exercise. There was a spiritual teacher in the 30s, Alice Bailey, and she wrote some beautiful books with exercises. He said, "Do this exercise every day and come back. We'll talk next week." I did the exercise. I felt really different. I'd never meditated before. Suddenly, I really felt my body expand and my consciousness expand. And I did it every day, and my friend had the same experience. We went back the next week. We paid our $2. We sat with the little old ladies. The gongs went, and we went up to him afterwards. And we said, "Well, we did it. This is what happened. Now, how do we meet Sufis?" He said, "No, no. Do this exercise now for another." This went on for about 6 weeks. And we weren't getting frustrated. We were just, what have we gotten into? And the ladies would be giggling when we came in, and we were like the pets. So after 6 or so weeks, we said, well, we have to ask our usual question. "Do you know any Sufis?" He said, "Yes. And one is coming here this coming Tuesday. Come back." So we came back, and instead of the little old ladies in the room, there were probably about 20 people in the room. A man came in wearing a Moroccan cape, and very striking, handsome man dressed in Eastern clothing. And he began to speak. And at first I thought he was speaking a foreign language, and he was actually speaking English,
Mm.
which was his native language. He grew up in England, but he was talking about things really out there. And we did that, and we did a meditation with him. And afterwards, it was over, and he was walking out, and he said to my friend and I, "I'm going to the Greenwich Village to listen to an Indian musician. Would you like to come?" And we said, "Sure." And we went, and his name was Pir Vilayat Khan, and he was really a wonderful teacher. I was with him for well over 40 years.
Wow.
And he was my friend as well as my teacher. And he was the son of a Sufi named Inayat Khan. Hazrat Inayat Khan was directed. There were four major Sufi lineages in India where he lived. And he was directed by the heads of all four as a young man to go to the West.
Mm.
And at that time, there were very few, you can count on your hand how many people from India came to the West. So he came in 1910. And before him, you might know Swami Vivekananda in 1893 came to the Parliament of World's Religions. There was an incredible Buddhist teacher, Shaku Soyen, who came in 1906. Ed Khan was a master musician. He was recognized in India as what we would say is a protege, and he grew up and he played in the courts of Maharajas. He played the veena, stringed instrument. Well, he came to the West, came to New York City, 1910, and he at first made a name for himself by playing music. And he came with two of his brothers, and they backed up playing tabla, and he played the veena and he sang. And people loved Indian music. They'd never heard anything like this. Anyway, after each musical concert, he would talk for a few minutes about the unity between people and the necessity to recognize that behind us all there's one being, and the religions are just different forms suited to different cultures and different needs of the day. But the women and the men who actually brought the real teaching, they were beyond any one form. And I studied with Pir Vilayat for, I guess, a year or so. Something very strange happened. He was coming to New York to lead a seminar, a weekend seminar. It was well publicized. Probably 150 people had signed up. As the plane from Paris, where he lived, was taking off, the windshield blew out.
Wow.
The plane landed safely. And remember, this is the 60s. The plane landed safely, but they canceled the flight because it was going to take a day to repair it and test it. So I had helped set up the seminar. It was in a hotel, in a ballroom, and so on. And I get a call from him from Paris. And he said, I'm not going to be there. And I said, oh, okay, well, we can cancel. He said, don't cancel. I said, well, Hugh D'Andrade, the man from the place with the old ladies and the gongs, he was the speaker. I said, well, Hugh D'Andrade can come and do it. He said, no, he's not going to do it. You are. And I said, I'm not ready to teach anything. He said, you're right. You're not ready. But if we wait until you're ready, you'll never be ready. Go up there, listen to your heart, and do the best you can.
Mm.
So I went, I announced at the beginning, and half the people left, but maybe 50, 60 people stayed. And I don't know what I did, but it seemed to work.
Mm.
And all I did really was listen to my heart. I followed the teaching. After that, I had an incredibly powerful, also Sufi teacher who came and lived with me for 6 weeks. And he was an American. His name was Samuel Lewis, and he was from San Francisco. And he was a real believer in the need for peace in this world. He had a very interesting life, but that was the one string behind it all. And he was really powerful, very direct, very loving. I'll tell you one story about him that will really say who he was. He was living with me, as I said. I had this little apartment in New York City. I had just finished law school. So it was 1970. I got to get my years right. And I had a friend, not a girlfriend, but a friend that I had met. He was 16 and I was 23 or something at the time. And I actually knew her sister, and that's how I met her. And one day, while Sam Lewis was there, she called me up and she was just crying hysterically. And when she calmed down, turns out she had an abortion at 16. And she just was in such a state of pain and confusion. I don't even think she knew how she got pregnant, frankly.
Mm.
And she said, I don't know what to do. And I knew enough to know that she could harm herself. So I said, look, I have a friend staying with me. He's an old man. He's in his 70s, but he's really good at helping people. Do you want to come and meet him? And she said, I'll I'll come the next day." So she came. He was lying down on a couch in the living room, and he just turned over and he looked at her and he said, "Come here, child." And she did. She came and he said, "You kneel down." It was a low couch. "You kneel down and put your head right here." Sam Lewis was 5 feet tall too.
Mm,
But he said, "Just put your head right here." She lay down, she put her head on his heart, and he said, never forget this, he said, "Feel no shame."
mm,
Then there was silence. Then he said, "Feel no shame," over and over again for a half an hour. She just sat there with her head on his heart, weeping.
mm,
And he just continued this. He never asked anything. He never told her what to do. He just repeated it. After a half an hour, she said, "Gosh, I feel so much better." He said, "Very good."
mm,
That was the end. But that's what I saw, a real human being. No
mm.
judgment, no do this and do that. He just did the real work. That was Sufi
Mm.
Sam.
Very profound. Very
Yeah.
profound.
So from there, without taking up hours and hours, I began to look for teachers in New York City of any tradition, any religion, any path. I just wanted to learn. And I just kept going from one to another. Then I realized I had to try outside of New York, and I started traveling the world for many years. And I would find teachers. I was in China, I was in Indonesia, I was many times in India. I was in the Middle East, in Israel, and I just looked for anybody who could help me. And I just tried to absorb, and that became my path. And the first thing I learned about Sufism that really made me know for me I was on the right path was that there is no dogma. The teaching evolves just as the students, so to speak, evolve. So there can't be a dogma. It's not about technique. Of course, there are different practices and many different ways of practicing, but you find one that's suited to your constitution, to your character, to your need.
Very beautiful. It seems like the way, for lack of better words, the way it should be, as far as each soul finding their way and being supported.
Yes, I see today there are so many people with so many different diets. This is the one you should use. You'll live long and on and on. But human beings have different constitutions, and everybody needs to find a diet that suits them. And it's the same with spirituality. You need to find that which suits you. Some people are naturally kind of like monks and nuns, and they would like to withdraw from the world. And I know I have students who do this. And there are others who you said, how do we do it in the world? Some people couldn't and don't. But many of us do have to do it in the world. And spiritual training allows you to do that. For the last 20 years, I have founded and now am one of the founders and co-chair of a group called the Abrahamic Reunion. And it's comprised of peacemakers who are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Druze. Druze is the fourth religion in Israel, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. And our work is to create situations where people of the different faiths can get to know each other as human beings. And we work with young people. We have different projects for young people, projects for women, projects for clergy. And then we kind of bring everybody together once a year in a big meeting just to feel and hear each other and get to know each other. If I didn't have the background of the work, the inner work I've done, working in the Middle East has been really difficult. And you can
Mm,
imagine now with the war going on. And I hear every day from people in Gaza, people in Israel, people in the West Bank, even yesterday, someone from Lebanon. And the cries coming out are very real. People, and not the leadership, but people are suffering.
mm,
And through the suffering, first they become traumatized, frankly,
mm,
but those few who work out the trauma really are changed human beings, much more sympathetic, much more loving. So we continued the work. We're the only organization, peace organization, that continued the work through the first war and this one. We're really seeing results. It's painful and powerful
mm,
and impactful and sometimes almost hopeless work. but we keep persevering. All of that comes from the spiritual path. And it's not just Sufis, it's people on many different paths.
Beautiful. Somebody from work the other day from Life Keto that you're aware of, he sent me a little video from John Stewart of an Israeli man and another man, a Muslim, I believe, and just their
Yeah.
friendship that grew. And just seeing that, to me, in one way, you don't want anyone to go through trauma or suffering. And it seems like it's part of humanity. And then to see people that are able to rise out of the ashes and be a light, be love, be a spark. It's another type of power that often isn't achieved from not going through things like that.
Yes, indeed. Even on a personal level, I don't think I would be who I am if I hadn't done this work. And one time I was in Jerusalem and my younger son was with me and he was probably 20 at the time. And 200 yards away, 200 meters away, there was a huge explosion. Everything became silent. And I turned to my son and I said, "You don't think," he said, "Yes, it was a bomb." And it turned out it was a bus that was blown up by a suicide bomber. 16 people died. And the impression of that silence in that moment changed my life. I knew that I had to really, really put this forward and do whatever I could do. So,
Beautiful in that way for you to feel some type of authentic calling, whatever word somebody wants to say, and you know, this is my path.
yeah,
This is what I'm going to do with my
y-
life.
yeah,
And like you're saying very beautifully, it came from the inside, but it's meeting an outside need and also something that aligns with who you are and your character, your soul, your constitution, and it's the right path. I would love to, I don't want to interrupt if you're about to go somewhere, but I would love to explore the inner and the outer because what you're doing in the world to me, it's really the spirituality, hitting the road and really doing the work. And so I would love to go further with that and also go into your own personal internal spiritual journey. So do you have a preference of which one we look at first?
yes. I would prefer we start with the inner.
Okay, great. So you have a lot of experience people can hear from just what you've shared through the years of doing this. And if you just pretended there was no religion, no Sufism, no Christianity, no Judaism, anything, and there was just what you know on the inside from your journey, I would love if you could share what practices or inner workings have allowed you to come to a place inside of yourself that maybe you feel like is home, and how did you find that within yourself? And then also things that come up that seem to interfere with that direct connection to that. How have you worked with those things that seem to interfere for you?
Yeah, that's a great question or questions. First, let me say that I'm a great believer in retreating from the world. And the practice that has taught me the most has been silence. I do mantric yoga, chanting, and I do different practices with my body, and they're wonderful. But the essence of it all comes when I'm silent within. Even I practice meditation every day. The first goal and the last goal is to be silent. So the mind is quiet. When the mind is quiet, the heart, I don't mean the physical heart, I mean that very essential part of each human being is awakened in a way that it can transform us through love and the energy of love, which is inherent in every human being. We might not think so when you read things in the news and so on, but it's there. It's just really covered over by a lot. So I've been on many retreats. I was silent on one retreat for 49 days, and the very essence of it came to me in the last hour. After 7 weeks, real essence came right in the last hour. I mean, of course, I had experiences during the retreats, and I've learned to appreciate silence. And, I'm a fiery person. I like to talk, I like to interact, but I use silence as my spiritual discipline. So I've trained myself to listen to people, not just listen with my ears, but to kind of feel people. And I have a very good friend, Ghassan Manasra. He always says, you need to taste people. So you need to be silent to do that. Otherwise, our minds are just interacting with other minds, and it doesn't promote peace, frankly. So silence is the first practice to promote peace, training yourself not to speak. not to respond to everything that comes from the outside. And the key there in the training of silence is the breath. So, there are so many different breath practices in so many different paths. But if you step back, you see remarkable similarity. And usually it's one or two things change. But breath, to me, is the absolute key to quieting the mind, and breath is the key to overcoming death, which is most people live with a subconscious fear of death. And that's why it's so great to work with young people, because they have no fear of death, but it develops eventually. So it's breath and silence. For me, those are the two key practices. And then there are others, and this one takes real training, but to love unconditionally, even those who are causing tremendous harm. And there are human beings on the planet today causing huge harm. It'll take us a while to recover from it. I don't mean outwardly, inwardly, the global psyche. So loving some of those people unconditionally, it's not easy. I had another teacher, a man from Norway, and his name was Bryn Bjors, and he was in the underground in World War II in Europe. He faced death all the time. Ultimately, he moved to America, and he was an engineer, and he designed torpedoes.
Wow.
And yet he was a peacemaker.
Mhm.
And he was a very interesting, brilliant, loving guy. And one day we were talking, and he said, "Oh, you have to love everyone." And I said, "Well, what about Hitler?"
Mhm.
He said, "Yeah, Hitler too." He said, "Do that." It took me 10 years.
Mhm.
I would try all the time. It took me 10 years. And I said, how can I possibly love? And I went through all the excuses, love the essence, not the actions. And, all that's helpful at points, but it wasn't real love. And at a certain point, I had a moment of that experience of really loving someone who had done monstrous things. So it can be done. I can't say I always do it, but I always try.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing, and I would love, if you're okay, going a little deeper with each of them. So we'll start with the Hitler and go back to the breath. So I personally understand in myself, if I'm in a state of love or a condition of love in myself, there's love, and then I'm just expressing it outward and whatever's going on. How inside yourself, when you said there was a moment it happened, what do you feel? I mean, it may have been the process of all the things you were doing, but what allowed it to go from some idea that I should be doing this to actually somehow finding love for this thing that represents evil?
Well, evil, which exists, by the way, but evil is known by its opposite, which is good. So we begin to learn in a dualistic fashion. This is good, this is evil. That's necessary as part of learning. At a certain point, one can choose to not learn by duality anymore. I don't know if you know, in Hinduism, there's Advaita, and it's really the study of oneness. And there are many teachers of many different paths who pull us back from the duality. Even Martin Buber in the I thou relationship really has to shift. You need to experience it, you need to be able to create boundaries, then you need to come back from it. People always ask me, isn't it dangerous? I say, it is. It is, because you're not in control. When you step back from duality, you're really letting life live and see what happens. And yeah, difficult, terrible things can happen, but at least we are really living life. So when I meet someone or think of someone who are doing terrible things, I have the discipline that I've developed to not let my mind dictate to me who that person is. So I don't look at it dualistically, and I try and connect with the actual soul of the person. Soul is a word that has many different meanings, but for me, soul is the action of God, actually. Everybody's soul is God. But back to your question specifically, how does one do this? Well, when I encounter someone or think of someone, which I do, who are committing really heinous acts, I first watch my breath. And what do? I just make sure my breath is rhythmic, not chaotic. And I attune my breath to my heartbeat. It's a very simple practice, but sometimes the simple ones are the best. So I breathe in for 4 counts and I breathe out for 4 counts. And if I'm walking, I walk to 4 counts in, 4 counts out. And I'm using my pulse. And I begin to then feel a sense of rhythm, a sense of calm come into me. And I also can put words on my breath. So the one that I do all the time, I did it before we meet today. I breathe in 4 beats towards the one empty, the last beat. So I'm breathing towards the one, breathing out towards the one, but not out loud, silently. So it's on my breath. And I find that that simple exercise is really beneficial. And I've shared it with a lot of people, and many have done it and still do it and find it very helpful. Some people don't like it because it's not complicated,
Hmm.
and people like what's complicated. So I could make up things to make it more complicated if that's what they need. But ultimately, it is the real simplistic rhythm in the breath that helps. Then I do other exercises every day. I do 20 breaths, 5 each for each of the elements, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. And these 20 breaths purify the elements. And the elements are not the physical earth and water and so on. That's symbolic. The elements are different energies that hold impressions, hold thoughts, hold trauma too. So every day I do this breathing, 5 breaths in through the nose and out through the nose, 5 in the nose and out the mouth, 5 in the mouth and out the nose, 5 in the mouth and out the mouth. And I have work with colors for each of them. So for earth, the color is gold. For water, the color is green. For fire, obviously red. And for air, blue. And then after I purify the elements, I feel the element behind all the elements, which is the purity, the etheric, the soulful. And by doing that in a short period of time, I'm clear, calm, and I'm not carrying the impressions that we take all day long. We take impressions from other people. We take it from the media. We take it from a chair that we're sitting in. We take it from the train you might be riding
Hmm.
on. We take all of this stuff in. We're like sponges. And so this just releases some of it. There are more advanced practices, but I don't wish to go into them now. But these basics really work.
Hmm. Yeah, I always think it's the fundamentals with everything that have the biggest impact.
Yeah, people are always asking me for different mantra, and we call it wazaif. And then I say, oh, well, why don't you try this? And they try it after 3 months. Okay, I did that one. What's next?
I done it. I've done.
Right, I've done that. And I say,
Yeah,
well, I'm doing after 50 something years the same practice that I was given. Just
yeah,
keep doing it. And
yeah,
it's really had revelation for me. So we are trained to kind of attain a goal, attain a goal, attain a goal. And that's good. That's helpful at a certain point. But then it just becomes commerce, you know? You pay
Mhm,
the energy and you get this reward. And I
mhm,
haven't found it to be that way.
yeah. Yeah, hearing you speak your essence, me feeling you and like tasting you like you're talking about, I do feel a lot of calmness and love and wisdom. And I want to kind of play back with my words what I sense and hear, and I would love for you to add to it. So, when you talked about silence, for a lot of people, and we've all experienced this, the mind could just be a chatterbox, and you can't quiet the mind from the mind, the same energy that's doing it. And so, when you're referring to silence, I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't know how to be silent. My mind doesn't stop. And I think when you spoke about, okay, put your attention on your breathing, and then you can fill the breath up with your mind with a mantra, like you were saying. And then for someone to find something that feels true to their heart, whether it was given by a teacher or something that fills the breath with this essence of what they're wanting to rest into, because it's already within us. And then when you use Hitler as an example, our story can easily hate Hitler's story because the story of our personal journey. But what I sensed you were talking about is, okay, that's part of the journey, but to go to a deeper place where there isn't a story. And then when you're in the silence of your soul, and you see that the God, energy, love, whatever someone wants to call it, that made you also made Hitler. And so it's that love, loving the love of the source of it all is one way I can see loving anyone and anything. And then also another way I can see it is anyone that's doing anything other than loving somebody is in their own suffering and their actions are not correct, but it just tells you the level of their confusion and suffering. So many years ago, and I've referred to this before, I was at a seminar with this well-known neurologist, and he said that I was always pro the death penalty. He said that I scanned thousands of brains of people on death row, and I could no longer do that because there's an illness and they were born that way. And so I can't blame them. Yes, they should not do those actions, but we're stepping behind the story. And that doesn't mean that our story loves someone else's story, but you're getting to a deeper place of realization that there is some essence that we all come from. And if we're not living from there and honoring that in others, that's our own level of discomfort or torture, if you will.
Yes. Yes, yes. First of all, I agree with everything you say, by the way. Not that I'm here to disagree with anything, but I do agree. If we habitually do not do that, if we habitually blame the other, the way this universe works is by reflection. So although we don't see it, there's constantly a mirror before us. And what we project is then created by our subconscious and ultimately comes out and it can come out in harmful ways. But I want to reiterate, living a life of love and peace and quiet is dangerous. And why is it dangerous? Because many people find that threatening. People, it sounds judgmental, but it's an observation. People who are not comfortable with themselves, with their own minds, their own hearts, they are very quick to judge the others. And then they live in a world of judgment. And that's the world we created. We say that, well, God's creating this. And I even tell people, I say, look, it's okay to pray to a God out there, but at some point it has to become one.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're not pleading, you're not petitioning, you're not buying, you become real. And when you become real, you recognize I'm an adult, I'm responsible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm responsible for what I create, for what I think, for my actions. I'm responsible. So it's not easy,
Yeah.
but it is enlivening. It gives life.
Yeah. For me personally, living from a state of love is the only thing that feels right for me because everything else feels like I'm putting some kind of mask on, maybe because I was so rigid and so OCD and all these kind of qualities. Once I learned to rest into love and source and whatever somebody wants to call it, I actually feel safer than I did before because I had so much angst inside of me that somehow there's like a faith, a trust that in the rest of my essence, my authenticity, I'm more adaptable and more able to connect than I was from putting on some kind of mask of protection. So it gave me something interesting in the opposite than I experienced.
I think it also gives more energy. It takes a lot of energy to live in a limited story.
No, it's true. Right on. We're fighting ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. If you step back a bit, if you have quiet, really helps. And back to practices, this is again a generality. If you're under 35, you can really experience loving and awakening and everything else by dancing, for example.
Mm,
If you're over 35, you better learn meditation
that's great.
because,
That's great. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
you
wonderful.
and meditation really is important. And again, you need to be able to concentrate to meditate. Then you need to be able to contemplate. And finally, you can practice meditation. And 1 minute of real meditation is very valuable. I had a very dear teacher up in the Himalayas, Swami Sundaranand, who lived in Gangotri, the source of the Ganges River. And we would meditate for 3 or 4 hours at a stretch. And at the end of it, he would say, how much was meditation? And I would say, about 8 minutes. He'd say, good, very good, you know? So, yes, of course, you have to train like anything else. And then the
Yeah.
8 minutes becomes 12. And my partner and I meditate every day. And at the end of it, we giggle and say, was that 2 minutes long or three? You know, it was really on and on, but it was like,
I think it's beautiful because for a lot of people, and I'm sure you've heard this through the years, I've heard this a lot. I can't meditate, my mind's too loud. Or two things I want to say about it. And the other is I don't believe meditation, I'm a Christian or this or that. I believe in prayer and meditation's bad. And I think to me, really call it what you want to call it, but all you're really trying to do is quiet and open yourself to the presence of the magical spark of life, whatever somebody wants to call it, of love, of God, of whoever that may be for each person. And I think, like you're saying, you have to be able to concentrate because our brains just jumps all over the place. We have to train it to be present. And if the presence is to our breath, to contemplation, to meditation, to prayer, what a beautiful practice. Even if it's 1 minute of 24 hours, it's
Right.
better than 0 minutes.
Yeah, and it'll grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in my own experience, I had this time in my life where first there was just, without knowing it, there was inner torture just from being separate from who I am on a deeper level and being caught up in so many different internal and external things. And then when I really started meditating and experiencing love and different things, all the parts of me that were not that, there was so much fear and insecurity and all these different things that were still loud. And so over time, my identity started becoming more with love and all, but I was still aware that I was battling myself at times. And one day I just decided to sit for hours. And I'm just not going to get up until I really understand this. And I got to the place where every insecurity and fear I got behind, at some point, I'm like, okay, human psychology, I'm afraid of being hurt physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it is. And once I got to that place in myself, I was like, okay. And I just stopped fighting it because I just realized anytime I'm reacting, it comes back to some essence of that, like, oh, I'm afraid of being hurt. And that's okay. And that helped me a lot. A lot of people I've spoken with, they haven't necessarily had a way in that way of working with their stuff. They just felt that their practices purified themselves and they didn't do something like that. But I'm curious for yourself today or in the past when things really come up that seem to disturb you or big patterns of yourself, how have you dealt with those in a way that you felt was not avoiding, but also not feeding?
Well, first of all, I did not do it alone. I'm a great believer in therapy when you need it.
Definitely.
So, or somebody at least to share this with and get feedback and reflection and feelings and insights. We don't have to do everything ourselves. The other thing is, if you do spiritual practice, whatever practice it is, as it becomes natural and integrated in your life, you don't have to do the practice at that time of difficulty. It's there. You're there. You've practiced. Now it's time to use it. And it comes automatically. So I do that. I really do that. I watch my breath and it tells me a lot. Did want to go back to one thing you said. It triggered something in me to remember this. It's a little out of context, but I use the words towards the one. They're good words. If I'm the Christian who doesn't want to meditate, what I suggest that person do is pick the words of revelation, the words of Jesus. They were all words of revelation and use those words on the breath. And in that way, maybe you're not classically meditating, but the mind will quiet down. I guess it's a complaint, even though I try to never complain, with so much of religion is that it's dualistic. And it's always God is out there, Jesus is out there. And after a certain point, hopefully, while you're still in this body, you recognize that's a limitation. And so, again, choose words of revelation, but make them within you, whatever the path you take, whatever the religion. And why words of revelation? Why do I say that? Well, some people choose words that are wonderful, but they're not spiritually powerful. And there's power in words, in language. And these great mystics and these women and men who had attained enlightenment, whatever that is, actually did receive words that can be spoken. And those are revelatory words. And they're in all the religions. The teachings of the Buddha, although they're so profound, it is in the essence of a few simple chants that his essence can be found, can be discovered.
Yeah, great reminder because there is power to a word or our power
Yeah,
to words,
yeah,
and making sure the word is taking us closer to God and the source and love and not just some thing to
yeah,
distract us from our
yeah.
misery or something that's really aligned. Going back to, when I came up with the name of the spiritual ninja, we really do, like, each one, like you're saying, has our own constitution, our own story, our own genetics, our own everything. And how do we inside ourselves use our breath, use the words, use the colors, use love to rest into our soul, into love, into silence. And I think each person does have to find their unique way, which I think is beautiful. I don't think it should be you doing it for somebody, because then it's not really attained or realized.
And I don't think we can do it for somebody anyway. I always tell people, try this practice for 2 weeks or whatever. If you don't think it works, get back in touch with me. I'll give you a different practice. Not every practice is for every person. And humanity is always trying to develop some collective thing that will work for everybody. There isn't such a thing. We're all different. Everybody's fingerprints are different. Why should our path be identical? We're all unique. And as we take responsibility for ourselves, we find out a very interesting thing. We find out why we came to incarnation in the first place. What's really my purpose? And it's not necessarily an occupation, it's not necessarily a teaching. There's some deep-seated force that pulls us here. I'm not going to go into the entire teachings, at least what I've discovered about the path of incarnation, but most souls never incarnate in the.
Mm,
It's only a few of us that incarnate.
mm,
And each of us comes with our own essence, our own perfume. And when we try and live somebody else's perfumes, it doesn't work.
mhm,
This is why so many young people have trouble with their parents. They're having this physical awakening of hormones and independence and so on. They're looking at their life differently than the way their parents are looking at their life.
mhm,
And the wise parents are the one who actually see, well, he doesn't have to grow up to be a miniature version of me.
mhm.
That's not what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think it's twofold? That do you feel that the purpose of life is for each person to realize their soul's color, flavor, aroma, and to live from there, and then they may have some kind of unique path on the outside as well? Or do you feel it's just more of an internal, or it's just hard to know?
Well, now I'll really confuse anybody who's listening to this. If you take the covering off of the soul, everybody's soul is the same. But it's the coverings that give us interesting life for the soul to experience. Because the soul is not on earth, the soul is within us on earth. So it doesn't have eyes. We are the eyes through which it sees, the ears through which it hears, and so on. So part of the work is uncovering, getting rid of the stories. And that's where we begin to feel our true essence. But if we ever could get rid of everything, which is what illumination is, we would find that everybody's soul is God and everybody's soul is the same stuff. Does differ is the energy of the emergence from the stillness. In other words, this is not literally true, but it's true nevertheless. The vast majority of God is absolute perfect stillness. It doesn't know that it exists. For it to know that it exists, there would have to be duality.
Mm,
It is in absolute unity. This is pure Buddhism. But for some reason, and really that reason is love, it projects some little tiny bit of its stillness into manifestation. That creates the universes, that creates the planets, the suns, the stars, that creates nature, which is really, for us, the real holy book. You know, the real scripture is nature, if we knew how to read it. And the energy with which each soul departs from the stillness varies. So some make it to, let's say, the first sphere of pure vibration. Some few of those souls go a little further, so to speak. Remember, this is not all literal.
mhm,
And they go into a world of genius, of mind and beauty and creating flowers and so on. And then some very few come all the way and become a human being, incarnate in the body. So the purpose of our life is to experience the purity of our soul, to uncover it fully. At the same time, and this is where you started in the beginning, purpose of life is to live life and to allow the infinite to experience itself through us. And ultimately, there are moments when we do lose ourself. We absolutely lose the self. And in those moments, we are one, but there's no us to bring the experience back, so to speak.
Mhm.
So it gets a little complicated.
Yeah, and there's no one to claim it. As soon as you hear any spiritual teacher claiming something, you know that's separate from the
I
source because, like, who's claiming that? So, speaking of that, I think being in the position of being a senior, a teacher, however you would refer to yourself personally, like I feel like maybe like I'm an educator. It's difficult because I've really gone through many layers of just trying to be an authentic soul and relating to people that way. But I've seen a lot of different times in my own life, personally for my wife, my daughter, with friends, with students, me thinking I know what would be good for them. And even if it's coming from clarity and love, because there's some type of agenda or something that isn't coming from them, there has been friction. There's been me not serving God in them in the way that I would have wanted to because the way I'm approaching it. So I'm curious in your own experience with your family, with whoever in your life, your friends, and also your students, wherever you refer to them to as, what is your personal process of going through as a human being and relating to other human beings? How do you see that?
For my family, I have 4 kids and 6 grandchildren. I know the nature of each one of my grandchildren, let's say. Some of them, I communicate my feelings in silence. Some of them, I very gently put out a story, literally a story, not my life story. And I say, "Well, what do you think of that story, you know? What is that all about?" And I try and them be comfortable with who they are at the moment. If they become comfortable, then through gentle conversation or silence, certain ideas get communicated. And that system I find works. That doesn't mean that I, as a parent, don't create boundaries or as a grandparent. I do. And boundaries are helpful and healthy, but not boundaries of the ego.
Mhm.
You know, I don't create boundaries where I think my feelings are going to be hurt. If someone hurts my feelings, I will tell them, "You're hurting my feelings," and see what happens. But with young people, especially, they're given too much advice and not enough example. So, you know, you asked how I think of myself. I think of myself as a friend to
Mhm.
other people.
Mhm.
If they learn from me, I don't think of them as students. I think of them as friends, and we're
Yeah,
kind
that's
of doing
beautiful.
this together.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful and wise. And I think that is the truth. And then we can come up with any story we want. And it's like, okay, well, that story just created separation. And when you were speaking, I had this sense, and I think we do this, but it really was clear in my mind for a moment of, say, in this moment, for either us, but anyone we're relating to, we're showing up in the best essence that we're able to in this moment, because that's our commitment to ourselves and our life. And then the person in front of us is expressing who they are in the moment with whatever that is. And how can I take that in from the person and respond in a way that seems appropriate to support them instead of me, without even consciously doing it, trying to do something, trying to create something instead of seeing where they're at, like you're saying. And if somebody is, a kid's going crazy and hurting people, okay, that kid needs some strong boundaries because they're not able to do it themselves. But in most situations, when people are coming and talking or asking for support, or it's our job to help them with something, it's really listening to them for how they seem that they're going to be able to best take in that moment instead of just throwing our answer at them. And so I love how you're referring to, you have a sense of the constitution of your grandkids. And it seems from your experience by observing how they best take in things to help them. And I think that's really beautiful because I've spent so many hours in my life trying to get through to somebody that I was creating the wall for them instead of
Right.
like realizing that they were asking for something different than I was providing or the way I was providing it. And I think it's very humbling just to realize that we don't know and we can do our best to be open and listen as a friend.
I think what you've just said is really profound. People are not used to being listened to. So if we, as a teacher, a friend, whatever, parent, listen, that's 90% of the proper interaction in the relationship. You know, it's humorous, but I think there's great wisdom. Yogi Berra said this phrase. Yogi Berra was the catcher for the Yankees when I was a kid. And he said, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. And we don't know which way to go. We have to kind of learn to feel things out. That means listening to someone. That's the fork in the road. Then you'll know what to do, if anything. Maybe the most important thing you do is listen.
Yeah, I remember hearing of an Israeli teacher years ago. Someone shared with me that their whole teaching was just that, just listen. When I think of that, if I just listen, there's already the energy of life happening. And how do I listen and taste the flavor and the aroma, like you were talking about, of the essence of the moment, and then let the most open, responsive capability that I have in the moment to respond in an authentic way and not impose. I have all these tools or stories or things that can help somebody. It's just more of, let me just listen to this person and be an open heart and love.
Well, that's certainly a way of loving, is to listen. And of course, we need to develop the concentration so that we actually can listen.
Hmm.
Sometimes
Yeah.
you talk to people and they're answering something you haven't barely gotten out yet. So,
Yeah, I've definitely had to continue to practice that because personality, whatever it may be, different things I've done in my life, it just seems like without knowing it, someone comes to you and you think, or thought it was my job to fix, instead of realizing the only job right now is to listen and be open. And then if there is another job, it'll present itself, but not from me presenting my answer.
right. So, well said.
Again, this is my own perception with working with a lot of people. I think a lot of people are just caught in this cycle of getting through life, of it's hard. There's a lot of internal struggles and there's a lot of external stuff. And it's just a lot of fear, a lot of suffering in the world. And I think people are not usually taught how to live well. We're taught a lot of things. And I think learning how to live is really the first thing that we all should be taught, but it's really not that way. So, is there anything that you feel that if people are just trying to find their way, any things that you'd like to share with them as far as possible suggestions for them?
Well, you've asked the impossible question because each of us really learns from our own experience, not our concepts. And concepts of spirituality are not spirituality, they're concepts. If I was forced to give an answer, I would say first learn to not fear change. It's our fear of change that inhibits us from growing. And it's not a change if you think you know what's going to happen if you do this, so to speak. I was taught early on, I was with someone and I said, what exactly is spirituality, real spirituality? They said, real spirituality is shooting an arrow at a target in a room that's totally dark and you really don't even know if the target's there. So we're not here to know. We're not even here to learn. We're really here to experience who we are. And there are many different ways. And maybe you'll find one way that's perfect and then one day you'll think it's not, but you'll say, "But I've done this for so long, I have to." Just don't fear change. When it comes, it comes. So that's the first thing. The second thing, there are four English words with C, starting with the letter C. I think we can end on this. Complain not. Criticize not. That's a tough one, those two. Condemn not. I'm not going to tell you what the fourth one is. Everybody who listens to this, figure it out for yourself. Complain, criticize, condemn. There's a fourth one. You'll see it's obvious. I'll even give you a hint. It starts with CO. So that's well, I can already feel people being uncomfortable. Compare not. That's the most dangerous thing we do. Each life is an individual expression of the infinite love. It's not for us to become like somebody else. Learn from somebody else and become ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think probably the other C's come from that. And the essence is somehow feeling like you're not enough, whatever
Yeah.
that enough is. And if you just realize that there isn't enough, just being you is the only way of being enough. And the comparison is just trying to make ourselves feel enough when we don't feel enough, just the
Yeah.
heads and the tails instead of the
Yes.
center point.
One more thing, and then I'm talked out.
Yeah, sounds great.
We need to understand the evolution of the human being. As we evolved, we needed to develop very strong egos so that we could be protected, so that the limited amount of people in the race, whether it was Neanderthal or whatever, could be protected. So we developed very strong egos so that we would survive as a race. We're not done yet, but the nature of the ego is changing. We don't need it to protect ourselves so much. And what we're seeing today, the wars and the senseless killing and destruction, is a throwback to that very primitive ego. Humanity is and will evolve, and the ego will evolve, and we will develop a gentler, more collective ego, which will then help us move further along in the evolution of what we're destined to become. We're at the very beginning of human evolution, and we need to allow the ego memory of the past to diminish and look towards the future of a more united, loving, committed community of human beings in communion with nature. And that's where we're going. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
Really,
you, David. It
I've
was a
enjoyed
pleasure.
this.
Me too. I really, really enjoyed our time together. And thank you for the incredible internal and external work you're doing. It's a need for more and more love. And I appreciate your commitment to that.
Yeah, and if people want to, you can go online and look up the Abrahamic reunion and see what we're.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll put a link to your
Okay.
website. Thank you for being part of the Spiritual Ninja podcast. I really appreciate you being here. My goal with the podcast is to share heart to heart, soul to soul conversations. So if you would be so kind to share and to follow, that helps me get the word out about the podcast. Okay, thank you, and hope to see you on another podcast soon.